Welcome to the My House Podcast, a show about the past, present, and future goings-on at the My House Youth Drop-In Center in Wasilla, Alaska, with your host, Michelle Overstreet.
Hi, welcome to episode 30 of the My House Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Overstreet, and today I'm joined by Michael Carson and Michelle Parker. Thank you both for being here. We're excited to share just some information and critical information about fentanyl, and we've got graduations coming up next week, and we're having a little panic moment in the drop-in center just about getting information out. So thank you both for being here. Before we get into our discussion, Isaac, do you have any housekeeping for us?
Yeah, we have a couple of things. The boutique asked that I just mentioned that they're doing their Saturday sales, which are going really, really well. They've got a table every Saturday, and they're open 10 to 3:30, I believe it is. And everything on the table is $1. So there's all sorts of stuff that they're just trying to get out of inventory that is on super sale. So stop in Saturdays at the boutique. I mean, stop in any day, but especially on Saturdays for the super sale. Open mic is the fourth Friday of this month as well here at the Drop-In Center. And what else do we got going on for events? The next big one is the golf tournament, which is still a couple of months away. And we're hoping that maybe we have another big event that will come up before that golf tournament, but that we won't know until it's a little bit closer. Michelle has housekeeping.
There's actually the recovery barbecue on the 27th.
Oh, that's excellent.
That is right.
It's going to be at
Michelle.
the Nunley Park.
Yay.
What time is that
fun.
again?
12 to 4.
12 to 4.
And who is sponsoring that?
Nunley Park.
True North Recovery.
Sure.
We're co-sponsors with them. And there's a Facebook invite and page that talks about it. So,
okay, I think that's cool. All I got. Thank you, Michelle P. There's 2 Michelles today. Everyone can try to keep track.
Awesome. Well, let's get started on our topic. I know, Michael, you've been on like an incredible tour de force with sharing information on fentanyl, and maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about who's doing what across the state and what we're hoping for and what we're asking for, and really the critical nature of what we're doing. The arrival of fentanyl is terrifying.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Michelle, to share that information. The good news is that I was able to present last week at the Anchorage School District Board Governance meeting to talk about Kelsey's Law, which would mandate Kelsey's lesson once a year during Red Ribbon Week. Kelsey's lesson is the basic neuroscience of what happens when opioids enter the system. However, I had to let them know that about a year or two ago, I had to add 4 addenda to Kelsey's lesson, and one of those was titled Fentanyl, and I have to update that every 2 weeks because there's always, unfortunately, a drug bust, an overdose, some new facts and data that are coming out that are just screaming at us to do something. Just to back up a little bit, the reason I was with the Anchorage School District is that they had 10 overdoses this past month. And fortunately, and thank God, that no one died. 5 were on campus, and they were revived with naloxone, and then 5 were off campus. Previous to that, the Matsu experienced in March 3 fatal overdoses and 11 emergencies. So unfortunately, fentanyl is out there in a wide variety of substances. It is unfortunately taking lives and affecting families and friends and loved ones. Fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin and that much more addictive than heroin. It has a very short life so that the user ends up having a very short-lived high and then they need to go back and get it again. And it's also 100% more powerful than morphine. Besides that, they are saying that fentanyl is contaminating everything out there. It's contaminating heroin, cocaine, meth, and it's in counterfeit pills from Percocet to Xanax to Oxys and even Adderall. So the bottom line is there's nothing safe on the street. and everything has to come directly from a doctor or licensed pharmacist. Unfortunately, we still have people out there that are taking that gamble, and some of them, unfortunately, are losing.
You know, Michael, I remember probably 5, 6, maybe 8 years ago, there was a thing that was happening where kids were taking fentanyl patches that were prescribed to other people and chewing them up or melting them down and taking them all at once to get high from that. And now we've moved into that drug being in such a concentrated form that 2 or 3 grains the size of salt grains can kill a person.
Absolutely. And the national statistics say that overall adolescent drug use is on the decline. But the caveat is that the young people that are using drugs are using such more potent drugs.
Right. We've seen that. We've seen, Michelle, you've experienced this in your family. You shared yesterday that you had a loss over the weekend. Can you just share a little bit about how does that happen? What happens?
So this is the 4th loss that I've experienced within 6 months. The first 2 I lost within 24 hours in November, which was due to alcoholism. You know, alcoholism leads to other things. And I had, in February, my cousin passed away. She was only 27. And my guess was that she dabbled with cocaine and it was laced with fentanyl.
Gosh.
And she just didn't wake up. And she was just so young, you know. And then over the weekend, I lost another cousin. He struggled with alcoholism a lot, and after my aunt and my uncle died, his mom and dad, him and his brothers, they all just struggled. They struggle so hard with losing people, and they don't know how to grieve properly. You know, they don't know how to cope, and so they choose alcohol and drugs to cope with those things. And I guess he got into fentanyl, and unfortunately he lost his life due to it. And he's only 43, and it's really unfortunate because that's around the same age that my mom lost her life due to alcoholism. And it's challenging because they, you know, have so much potential, and there's so much that they could have done in their lives, and they could do all these things, but they're throwing their life away due to all these substances.
This is interesting because this conversation really just went from a drug risk reduction conversation to a need for grief counseling and grief groups. And I really think that that's the tangential piece that people are missing, that I think, Michael, you've shared the statistic that 1 in 3 Alaskans is already being impacted by this opioid, fentanyl, whatever the next drug is to come. And we're really, as a society, not that great at grieving, but we're also not that great at talking about the difficult stuff. We're not, I really appreciate the way that you spoke about your family members, that maybe they were dabbling with cocaine, and we don't have those really overt conversations very often. And even when we do have them, you can feel the shame. There's a veil of shame over that keeps us from really jumping in with both feet and saying, dude, this is so dangerous. This is, you know, let's keep this above board, and let's really talk about what's happening and how we get from risk reduction to life saving instead of grief and grief groups. What's in the middle there? What are we missing? What do we have to have in the middle of that picture? I mean, the grief is useful, but I wish we didn't have to go, it didn't have to end up there. So what's in the middle between that risk reduction and the loss of life? How do we intervene? I feel like shame is part of that conversation. What else is in there?
I believe that rather than the middle, I would like to prescribe upstream. I am all about pulling people out of the river of addiction getting them into detox and getting them into treatment and hopefully into recovery and having a life second to none. But there's something to say about going upstream and cutting off the flow. And I believe that, unfortunately, for some reason, is a hard sell. I don't understand why folks are hesitant about that upstream primary prevention with drug education and prevention in schools. But I do know that part of that upstream primary prevention, besides students, are parents. I believe that parents are vital partners in battling opioids. Part of Kelsey's lesson has parents being a component of that. I believe it's important for parents to have all this information so they can have those important conversations with their children. I believe it's important information for grandparents and aunts and uncles so they can have conversations with their grandkids or, nephews and nieces. In short, I believe, everybody is a target audience. One pill can kill. One time, using heroin or cocaine or meth could be the last time. We know that for youth, part of being an adolescent is making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. But nowadays, one mistake could be your last.
That's an interesting thing that I've talked about probably in the last 3 weeks. I've probably talked about that a half a dozen times with different people who are older generations saying, when we were younger, you could experiment with alcohol, you could experiment with marijuana, you could experiment with different kinds of drugs and cocaine, you mentioned cocaine, and it didn't kill you the first time you used it. And last year, Michael, we know of 2 cases of kids that were just going to a graduation party that were honor students, did not use drugs. One of them took what turned out to be a counterfeit Percocet, but it looked like a pharmaceutical Percocet. That young person was probably told that it was a Percocet. It had the numbers on the back. It was stamped. It was the right color, and it killed him. And so there were 2 cases like that in Alaska that we know of last graduation season. And I really feel strongly, if you're a parent listening to this, or an aunt or an uncle or a friend or a young adult, please talk to your peers and just say that this is not something that you can survive. You're gambling. It's a roll of the dice, and you're gambling with your life.
Those counterfeit pills that you were mentioning, just within the last 2 months, there were 2 drug busts in Juneau. One was at the airport, and they seized 5,000 counterfeit pills with a street value of $150,000. 2 weeks later, in a traffic stop, they seized 6,000 counterfeit pills. And so counterfeit pills are widely distributed throughout the state. And as you mentioned, you cannot tell the difference. They are pressed crudely by the Mexican cartel. They have the same numbers and letters and colors as the real thing. And unfortunately, it is truly a crapshoot because sometimes one half of a pill can kill. It is truly opioid roulette, and it could turn into Nightmare Alley. I believe 100% abstinence is the only way to go.
To backtrack a little bit about what you were talking about, putting the informational stuff in schools and the trauma, I believe that should be included because the trauma that people have been through for generations, it gets passed down to the children. Like with my mom went to boarding school when she was a teenager and dealt with all these things, and she kept it so inside. And growing up, had all this trauma and kind of placed it onto us, and kind of with my dad too, but mostly my mom. And people don't really realize that generational trauma gets passed down through the bloodline. Mm-hmm. And when you don't know that when you're a child, it's like part of your identity. You don't really know who you are. And so that's kind of how like some people dabble with trying drugs and trying to escape and go the other route thinking they're cool and just wanting to fit in. And it's pretty serious because they think it's just something sweet or something, a treat, and it's...
And an escape.
Yeah.
And I think that trauma really addresses the issue of some people self-medicating and not having a safe place, a professional, to be able to realize that generational trauma wasn't your fault. And then there are incidences when there could be some direct trauma around sexual abuse, emotional, physical. And so being able to acknowledge that and then being able to have that safe place to work through those issues with a trained therapist is, I know nowadays we are really dealing with youth that are dealing with some mental health issues around anxiety and depression, suicide. And I think they're lacking that connection because we know, I love Carl saying that we know that addiction is all about isolation and recovery is all about relationships through connections. Being able to have a safe place and being able to be in a recovery group and having that support is truly vital. And I think we have a lot of young people that are feeling so alone. And then what happens is that they'll reach for that drug for that self-medicating purpose just to numb out so they don't have to deal with it. But that one time could be that mistake.
Michael, we have a young man who's been employed here who has a picture from his high school days with six young men in the photo. And he and one other young man are the only ones left alive. 4 of them are gone from that picture. And it's really heartbreaking. It's going back to generational trauma, Michelle, and acknowledging the fact that we've got young people in our communities who experience that and may not even realize that that was part of their growing up experience, that they weren't aware of all those dynamics. And so that education becomes really powerful. Then they get the choice of whether they continue to carry that or whether they set it down and say, this is where we break the chain. And that's what you're acknowledging and working towards is, I don't need to carry this anymore. This is not healthy. This is not the direction that we need to continue going in. And I think for this young man, some of the conversations we have had are around, is there survival guilt involved? One of the comments that he said to me, I was doing all those same things that they were doing. How come I'm not dead too?
I've experienced that too with my cousin who passed away in February. She's just like me, just wanting to go out and party with your friends, dressing up, looking cute, and whatever. And I survived a car crash, that took someone else's life. He didn't survive that, but I did. And then my cousin who experienced partying, taking a drug, and not surviving, I've experienced that guilt, like, why am I here?
Right.
Why? And then to think about it too, like, I'm here to break that chain.
Right.
Like, I'm here to include my voice so they don't experience that.
Mm-hmm. To represent. Yeah.
And, a lot of people, when people have children and everything, they are so big at, like, your kid learns everything at such a young age, but they don't include that. They don't include the seriousness of these drugs, and they don't include the seriousness of your feelings and your identity in schools, which they should be, because I didn't know, and I'm still trying to heal from everything that I've experienced. And I don't know, it's a lot to kind of deal with as an adult, because your mind is so set in your ways because that's all you knew.
Right. That your identity is with your family and the things that are normal, quote unquote normal, in that environment. I heard somebody say one time, I've got about 30 years in the counseling business, and I heard someone say one time that my family practice of coping is completely anchored in denial. and that there isn't really coping. It's just all denial. And I feel like that is culturally really comfortable for a lot of Alaskans because it's strong, it's sort of masculine. You know, we can do anything, we can deal with anything, we can make do with whatever. But at some point, and this kind of connects with what both of you are saying, we have to acknowledge what we're teaching and what we're role modeling, and then how we deal with the extraneous factors, you know, that we do lose people when they don't have the discernment and the ability to understand the risk that's being taken with just dabbling with cocaine. I like how you said that, because that became the difference between life and death. Mm-hmm. And it sounds so harmless, really.
Yeah. And, you know, it started off with drinking.
Right.
It started off with her drinking, and then she gets a little drunk, and she's like, oh, I want to get, because that's how I was, you know, in my addiction. If it was around, I'm like, yep, I'm going there, you know, because it's a gateway. When you're in that mindset, when you're intoxicated, your brain doesn't really think about the consequences of what could possibly happen. Mm-hmm. And so it's literally in anything, and it's scary.
Right. And the younger the young person is, the more bulletproof they think they are. This won't happen to me, and it's not. This isn't. Sometimes I think they feel like it isn't even relevant to me. You know, oh, well, that happens to someone else. That doesn't really happen to me. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really, really valid point. Michael, you had something that you were thinking.
Yeah, I heard a tagline that said, never say it won't happen to my kid. Ugh. And then I heard another tagline that was something to the fact that I'm not okay and you're not okay. But then I thought that just leaves it in a really bad spot. And then I heard what we need to do is make a plan to get better.
Yeah.
And we definitely need a plan in our state, in our community, to address this straight up. The reason for writing Kelsey's lesson was that John shared that Kelsey, that when she was in school, the message she got about alcohol and drugs they were bad, and that was the end of the conversation. And I think we owe it to our youth to provide them with honest, current, and accurate information. And then that way, without any catchy slogan like DARE or a one-liner that said, just say no, or, you know, some scare tactic like reefer madness, we know that all those strategies don't work, and that we need to provide youth with just that, the facts and the information. And we know that information is power, and it's powerful to be able to make better choices so one can stay safe, healthy, and thriving.
Yeah. You know, when you're saying that, like, when they tell kids that the drugs are bad and everything, it got me thinking about, like, you know, like in movies and other things, like girls will see, like, the bad boy, and they're like, oh, I like the bad boy. And they start dating them because they're attracted to that. And the bad boy will, like, have all these things and introduce those. So I think my point is, like, sometimes people are attracted and are curious to that bad stuff because, like, it's like, oh, it's bad, but it's cool, you know.
Sure.
Or exciting, or,
yeah,
you know, the thrill.
Yep, it's edgy, wanting peer pressure, wanting to fit. Part of Kelsey's lesson is creating your own personal refusal skill. Then that is a homework assignment that is taken home and signed off by the parent, but we know that there might not be some parents available to do that. So we talk about finding trusted adults to be able to sign that off. And I really believe that in some cases, this movement needs to be more of a grassroots, boots on the ground, and from the bottom up. And those people sharing those stories, as you have been sharing, Michelle, with your story, I believe that those are the impactful stories. And I think that those will move people to do something. overdosing. So trying to navigate all the parameters and it's very complex, it's multi-leveled, and just being willing to listen, meeting people where they're at, and just saying, I'm here and I'm available. And I think that's, for all of us, we can take that lesson to heart.
Nice. Well, as we wrap up, I want to say thank you to both of you. Michael, you've been such a champion for years in the field of recovery and prevention, and really taking this task on with a group of active parents in grief, and carrying the standard forward for them when they're too grieved to be able to do so. And thank you for doing that. Awesome. And Michelle, thank you for being willing to share your story, for your recovery, for the strength that you have in your community and in our community, talking about difficult topics like historical trauma, like recovery, grief, and really you're leading and role modeling to your young community how to grieve and how to change that family legacy. So thank you for that.
Of course. I just want to say I appreciate being here, and whoever is listening, if they're struggling and if they feel hopeless, that there is another way, Like, I am living a life second to none, and my life has changed so much for the better since my sobriety, and I am more than happy to talk to anyone who is going through grief, loss, hopelessness, and addiction, because I've been through it all.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Thank you both for your sobriety and your voice. If you need to get in touch with either Michelle or Michael, you can email myhousemattsue@gmail.com, and we will forward those emails on. Isaac, is there another contact that you would recommend for reaching?
Calling into the office, 907-373-4357 is always a great way to get in touch with any of our staff members, or to get services or directed along to services that may help you or a loved one.
Yeah. Or if you have questions, give us a call. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Michael and Michelle, for being here. The My House podcast is recorded at the My House studio in Wasilla, Alaska, and our awesome producer and editor is Isaac Smolden. I'm Michelle Overstreet. Until next time.